Imagine standing at a starting line. The year is 1946.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, the dust of the Second World War is finally settling, right? The whole global order is being entirely rewritten. And you, as an observer of history, are handed this massive stack of betting chips.
Oh, I like this. A wager.
Exactly. You have to place a wager on the future. Specifically, you have to bet on two incredibly resource-rich, highly industrialized nations that are just poised to become global superpowers.
Right, in the second half of the 20th century.
Exactly. So in lane one, you have Argentina, and in lane two, you have Australia.
Two heavyweights.
Right. And if you look at their stat sheets at that exact moment in time, I mean, their agricultural output, their land mass, their educated populations.
The sheer volume of wealth flowing through their ports.
Yes, they look nearly identical. They are totally neck and neck. So looking at the board, which one do you bet on?
It is, well, it's the ultimate historical wager, isn't it?
It really is.
And what's fascinating is that if you were a betting person in 1946, going all in on Argentina wasn't just, like, a safe bet.
Right.
It was considered the absolute smartest money on the table. I mean, they were the undisputed breadbasket of the world at that point.
Because Europe was just wrecked.
Exactly. Europe and parts of Asia had been physically pulverized by the war, but Argentina was completely untouched by the devastation.
They were just raking it in.
They really were. They were flush with foreign cash from selling beef and wheat to starving Europe. They were widely considered a locked-in, future-advanced nation.
Yeah.
They had the infrastructure, the culture, the wealth. They had it all.
Right. But here we are, roughly 80 years later, and, well, we all know how that race turned out.
We do.
Today, Australia sits comfortably in the top-tier developed nations. Incredibly high living standards, consistent growth.
The envy of a lot of the world, really.
Yeah, but meanwhile, Argentina is essentially trapped in this seemingly endless cycle of debt, default, and just staggering inflation.
It's a tragedy, economically speaking.
It is. Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive for you listening. We've got our hands on this sweeping 15-page academic framework.
It is dense, too.
Oh, it's so dense. It forensically tracks the socioeconomic evolution of Argentina, Australia, and brace yourself for a surprise wild card we will get to later, Armenia.
Yeah, that wild card really throws a wrench into things.
Totally. And the research tracks them from 1946 all the way into predictive models for 2025.
Right. And our goal today isn't just to give you a dry history lesson. We are conducting an investigation into what economists actually call the development paradox.
The development paradox. Let's unpack that.
So we are trying to answer one specific maddening question. Why do some nations that start with every conceivable natural and economic advantage fall into chaos?
While others build incredibly stable generational prosperity.
Exactly, because the answer fundamentally challenges pretty much everything we assume about what makes a country successful.
Okay, let's jump into the actual source material. Because when I first looked at the visual design of the very first page of this study.
With the minimalist white background.
Yeah, that exact one. The sheer visual contrast of the 1946 data stopped me in my tracks.
Right, where they place the two icons side by side.
Yeah, it's not just a slight divergence later on. It looks like two completely different realities eventually split off from that same starting point.
The visual is stark, and the researchers anchor their entire executive summary, that's on page 2 of the framework, in 3 specific evolutionary paths.
Right, the resource-driven trap, which is Argentina.
The institutional robustness model, which is Australia.
And the transitional revival sample, which is our wild card, Armenia.
Exactly. And to measure this, they use a very specific metric. It's the WDI Purchasing Power Parity GDP per capita.
The WDI GDP Cap PPPCon 2021, if we're being, super nerdy about the exact data tag.
Right, exactly. But I want to avoid getting bogged down in the academic jargon, so let's translate that for everyone.
Please do.
Basically, this metric strips away the distortions of international exchange rates. It looks at what a regular person's paycheck can actually buy in their own country over time.
Like real-world value.
Yes. How much bread, how much housing, how much electricity. It is the ultimate undeniable measure of a citizen's standard of living.
And when you graph that standard of living on page 3, the long cycle economic divergence from 1946 to the present day, you get two entirely different pictures.
You really do.
If you look at Australia's growth chart, it is almost painfully boring.
Boring is good in economics.
True. It is this nearly perfect, steady 45-degree line going up and to the right. decade after decade, the average Australian just gets a little bit wealthier.
A little bit more secure.
Right. But then you look at Argentina's chart. Wait, sorry, I shouldn't say ... You look at Argentina's chart, and it looks like a sawtooth.
A sawtooth. That is exactly what the data looks like.
It's jagged. It goes up, giving people hope, and then there are these sharp, violent declines, particularly once you hit the 1970s.
Yeah, and what you're seeing in that sawtooth pattern is the physical manifestation of economic trauma.
Trauma. That's a strong word.
But it's accurate. Each one of those jagged drops represents millions of people losing their savings,
Wow.
businesses going bankrupt, and literally a generation's progress being wiped out in a matter of months.
Yeah, and there's one point on the graph, the researchers specifically annotated it, that is just horrifying to look at.
Ah, yes, the big one.
Between 2001 and 2002, Argentina's data just drops off a cliff. It literally looks like you're watching a hospital EKG monitor, and the patient's heart just suddenly stops beating.
It's a massive downward arrow.
What does a drop like that actually look like on the ground for the people?
That was the infamous 2001 Argentine economic crisis, and it was catastrophic.
I can't even imagine.
To understand the human element behind that cliff in the data, you have to picture the corralito.
A corralito.
Yeah. The government desperately trying to stop a run on the banks and stabilize a failing currency pegged to the US dollar essentially froze all bank accounts.
Wait, froze? Like nobody could get their money?
Literally overnight. People could not access their own life savings. You were allowed to withdraw only a tiny, rationed amount of cash each week.
That is terrifying.
Imagine walking to your local ATM, right? You know you have $50,000 in your account to pay your mortgage and buy groceries.
Okay.
And the machine tells you that you can only take out $200. And the rules might change tomorrow.
The panic must have been unbelievable.
It was absolute chaos. It triggered massive social unrest.
Like riots.
Yeah, the cacerolazos, where thousands of citizens marched through the streets banging pots and pans because their money had effectively been confiscated.
Wow. Just banging pots and pans. That is such a visceral image.
The president actually had to flee the presidential palace in a helicopter. Poverty rates skyrocketed past 50% almost instantly.
Oh my God. 50%.
Yeah, but here is the critical takeaway from the research. That 2001 drop didn't just happen out of nowhere like an asteroid strike.
Right, it wasn't a sudden natural disaster?
No, it was the result of the economic engine continually stalling out and being neglected over decades.
I kept thinking about it like two marathon runners.
Okay, lay it on me.
You've got Australia, and they are just running at a boring, completely consistent, steady pace.
Hydrating at every mile marker.
Exactly. Checking their heart rate, just putting one foot in front of the other. Then you have Argentina. They sprint ahead, look amazing for 2 miles, then stop completely to argue with the crowd.
That's very true to the history.
Then they get lost and run backward for half a mile. Then they realize they are losing, so they try to sprint at top speed to catch up, which just exhausts them further.
That is a brilliant analogy because it forces us to ask the fundamental question. If both runners had the exact same caloric intake,
The same resources.
right, the same vast agricultural plains, the same mineral wealth, the same highly educated populace back at the starting line in 1946, why did Argentina's engine keep failing?
Exactly. If they both had the same high-octane fuel, what was wrong with the engine itself?
That is the big question.
Because I have to push back a little here on the mainstream narrative. It is so easy to look at a country's struggles and just, blame bad luck,
Or global commodities crashing.
right? Or unfair trade practices by other nations. But this research, especially on page 4, makes it abundantly clear that this wasn't bad luck.
No, it wasn't bad luck at all. To answer what was wrong with the engine, the data points us to the first major symptom of the disease.
Okay, what is it?
It's the mechanism that destroys the engine from the inside out, the destruction of the currency.
The silent thief. Inflation.
Precisely. The researchers analyzed decades of inflation data using the WDI inflation metrics.
The bar chart and bubble chart combo on page 4?
Yeah, that's the one. And they present a conclusion here that is deeply counterintuitive for a lot of people.
How so?
Well, in the news, we often talk about high inflation like it's a natural economic weather pattern, like a hurricane that just blows in from the ocean.
Or a drought.
Right. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it but batten down the hatches. But the data shows conclusively that chronic severe inflation is not weather.
It's not an accident.
It is a policy. It is a sustained, deliberate act of economic self-harm.
Let's look at the numbers to prove that, because the contrast is wild. You look at Australia, and again, boring is beautiful.
Always.
They have this incredibly stable inflation rate hovering between 2 and 5% for decades.
Yeah.
It's predictable.
A loaf of bread goes up a few cents a year.
Right. But Argentina's history is incredibly volatile. If you look at the late 1980s and early 1990s in the data set, they actually circled the peak in red in the study.
Yeah, to highlight the total evaporation of purchasing power.
Exactly. They completely lost control. We are talking about 8 or 10% inflation, which is painful enough.
We are talking about hyperinflation.
We are talking about prices changing while you are standing in line at the grocery store.
And we need to break down exactly how and why that matters on a structural, societal level.
Yeah, why does it break the engine so badly?
Because when a nation loses currency credit, meaning the citizens no longer believe the piece of paper in their wallet holds any intrinsic value, purchasing power simply evaporates.
It's just paper.
Right. But the secondary effect is actually much, much worse. It destroys the very concept of the future.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Think about human behavior. You cannot build a 10-year manufacturing factory. You cannot invest in a massive national infrastructure project.
You can't even take out a 30-year mortgage to buy a family home.
Exactly. You can't do any of that if you do not know what the money will be worth next Tuesday.
Right.
Hyperinflation completely eliminates long-term planning. It forces an entire society into short-term survival mode.
Everyone is just trying to make it to Friday.
Capital stops flowing toward innovation, research, or job creation, and starts flowing into whatever hard assets people can find just to protect their wealth.
Right. You're buying foreign currency or hiding physical U.S. dollars under your mattress.
Or buying real estate just to park your cash.
You might even just hoard non-perishable goods. But you are certainly not investing in a new tech startup or a local business.
No, absolutely not.
But wait, this brings me to a massive question.
Shoot.
If the data clearly shows that printing money to the point of hyperinflation destroys the future,
Yeah.
how on earth does a government justify policies that actively vaporize their own citizens' savings? Do they just not understand basic economics?
Oh, they understand the economics perfectly well. The answer is that bad economic policy doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Okay.
Governments don't fire up the printing presses and create hyperinflation because they think it's a sound long-term economic strategy.
Then why do it?
They do it because they are trying to survive the week politically. They need to pay government salaries on Friday, or they need to fund a massive subsidy program to keep voters happy, and they don't have the tax revenue to cover it.
So they print the shortfall.
Yes. Chaotic economic policy is the direct, unavoidable offspring of chaotic political systems.
Which brings us to page 5 of the outline, the political whiplash.
Exactly. The researchers pivot the deep dive here to globally recognized metrics, specifically the Polity 2 index.
The Polity 2 index, right?
Yes, which measures a country's democratic stability and institutional strength over time.
Right.
We're looking at the foundational rules of the game here.
And the data contrast here is, honestly, it's almost hard to believe.
The step chart they use is very telling.
Yeah. Since 1946, Australia has maintained an absolute flawless 10 out of 10 score for democratic stability.
Yeah.
Every single year. Never wavered.
It's just a straight line.
They have boring elections, peaceful transfers of power, and a completely independent judiciary. Argentina, meanwhile, spent the entire period between 1946 and 1983 essentially bungee jumping.
Bungee jumping is the perfect way to describe it.
They went from flawed democracy to military dictatorship, back to democracy, back to military junta.
It was constant turmoil.
You had the rise of Peronism, you had coups, you had the tragedy of the Dirty War. It was relentless political whiplash.
It was.
But I think it's vital we pause right here and clarify something for you, the listener, based on what the research actually says.
Yes, the impartiality of the data is crucial to understand here.
Exactly. The data in this study presents a harsh critique of what it calls short-term populist welfare and deficit spending.
Right.
But we need to make it incredibly clear that this is an objective, mathematical analysis of historical economic consequences.
It is not a partisan attack.
Right. And it is not an endorsement of any modern political wing, left or right. Because frankly, both sides of the political spectrum in Argentina made the exact same macroeconomic errors, just in different flavors.
That is a phenomenal point. Math does not have a political part.
It really doesn't.
The data simply observes an iron law of macroeconomics. You cannot spend money you do not have in perpetuity without the currency eventually collapsing.
Yep.
During Argentina's bungee-jumping decades, you had right-wing military dictatorships that borrowed astronomical sums of money from abroad to fund unsustainable projects and defense spending.
Leading to crushing debt crises.
Exactly. And then you had left-wing populist governments that fired up the printing press to fund massive, unfunded domestic subsidies.
Leading to hyperinflation.
Precisely. The flavor of the politics changed, but the destruction of the engine was identical.
Right. Whether the money is mismanaged by a military junta or a populist president, the math remains undefeated.
The purchasing power will evaporate. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the causality of the development paradox.
How so?
Political institutions are the ballast of the national ship. If a foreign company wants to invest $1 billion into a copper mine, they need a 20-year horizon to make a profit.
Sure.
They need to know that the laws governing that mine won't change overnight because a military junta just rolled tanks into the capital.
Or because a new populist leader decides to nationalize the industry on a whim.
Exactly. Without a predictable legal system, without peaceful, boring transitions of power, capital flees, both foreign and domestic.
The whiplash terrifies investors.
It absolutely does. And the research highlights a really poignant moment in the data that proves how deep this trauma goes.
Oh, the 1983 marker.
Yes. In 1983, Argentina finally, definitively returns to democracy. The military steps down. Elections are held.
There's a big green upward arrow in the researchers' data mapping marking this exact triumphant moment.
Right. The political stability index flatlines in a positive way, a perfect 10.
But the economic lag persists. The economy doesn't just magically snap back to match Australia. The sawtooth graph continues.
I know, it's tough to look at.
I found that so depressing, honestly. Why didn't the return to democracy fix the economy instantly?
Because a regime change doesn't instantly fix a broken economic engine. Trust is highly asymmetrical.
What do you mean by asymmetrical?
It takes decades of boring, predictable behavior to build institutional trust. But it only takes one chaotic administration to destroy it.
Yeah.
Even after 1983, the legacy of that political whiplash meant that institutions were hollowed out. Corruption was deeply entrenched in the bureaucracy.
The judiciary wasn't fully trusted.
Exactly. So even though they had the right to vote again, investors and everyday citizens remained incredibly wary. They kept their money offshore.
Wow. So if having established natural resources, a huge head start in 1946, and a massive agricultural base isn't enough to guarantee success.
Right.
What happens to a country that starts with absolutely nothing in the modern era?
This is where the researchers throw us a fascinating curveball on page 6, and it is my favorite part of the study.
And to the wild card, Armenia.
Yes. The study entirely shifts its focus to track Armenia's trajectory. And if you look at their GDP growth data, the WDI GDP growth metric.
They use an area chart for this one.
Yeah, and they are starting from a baseline that is practically zero following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and 1992.
I mean, I have to act as the proxy for you, the listener, right now and raise an eyebrow.
Fair enough.
Wait a minute. Armenia. We just talked about Australia and Argentina, two massive resource-rich economies. Armenia is a tiny landlocked country in the South Caucasus. They don't have the vast protected oceans of Australia.
No?
They don't have the endless fertile agricultural plains or the gold mines of Argentina. Furthermore, they're in a historically incredibly volatile region.
Very volatile.
In 1992, they had just suffered a devastating earthquake a few years prior. They were dealing with regional conflicts, and they faced severe blockades.
They literally couldn't get heating oil into the country during the winter.
Right. They were starting from negative, not zero. How on earth are they outperforming expectations? Because the data shows a massive explosive breakout in the mid-2000s.
It's stunning to look at. Despite all of those geographical and historical disadvantages, by the 2010s, Armenia's growth trajectory had sharply surpassed many older, established transitional states.
Incredible.
And the experts in the study use Armenia to illustrate a vital economic concept called latecomer resilience.
Latecomer resilience. Okay, let's unpack that.
It essentially proves that you do not need a century of geographical head starts to build prosperity. Having oceans full of fish and mountains full of iron ore is helpful, absolutely, but they are not the prerequisite for growth.
The prerequisite is institutions.
Exactly. Armenia proved that if a nation, even starting from the absolute bottom, can repair its baseline institutions, start enforcing the rule of law, and stabilize its society during transitions, economic growth will inevitably follow.
They didn't have gold in the ground, so they had to rely on the rules of the game.
Precisely. They focused on structural reforms. They worked to liberalize their trade. They pushed to digitize their government services to bypass low-level corruption. And they leaned heavily into their human capital.
Human capital. That brings up my next point. This is page 7 of the outline.
The scatter plot page.
Yes. Surely it must be because they have a brilliant workforce, right? Like the natural instinct when looking at a country with no resources that suddenly booms is to say, well, they just educated their way out of poverty.
Is a very common assumption.
Let's look at the education data, because this part of the paper totally shattered what I thought I knew about development.
It really challenges the great myth of modern development. There's this pervasive idea that education is a panacea.
That if you just build enough schools, hire enough teachers, and get everyone a diploma, prosperity will automatically, magically follow.
Right, but the researchers analyzed literacy rates and the average years of education across all 3 countries using the WDI literacy and education metrics.
And the data presents a stunning reversal of common wisdom. Both Argentina and Armenia have astronomical human capital reserves.
We are talking about literacy rates hovering near 99% for both populations.
Which is amazing.
They are incredibly educated, highly literate societies. They produce world-class doctors, engineers, and artists.
Yet for long, agonizing stretches of their history, this massive educational advantage did not translate into sustained national economic growth.
Why? Because of the environment you are placing those highly educated people into.
Right.
The researchers point us to indices that measure corruption and bureaucratic red tape, specifically the VDEM Corruption Index. When the institutional environment is highly corrupt, when there is an absence of true meritocracy, local talent simply cannot be utilized.
It's like, okay, imagine you take a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art Formula One engine.
Okay, I'm with you.
That engine represents your 99% literacy rate, your highly educated, brilliant workforce. But then you drop that incredible engine into a car with square wheels. The square wheels are the corrupt institutions, the endless red tape, the lack of secure property rights, the unpredictable courts.
That is a brutal image, but very accurate.
You can rev that F1 engine all you want. You are going to make a massive amount of noise. You might even generate a lot of heat and friction, but you are not going anywhere. The car won't roll.
That is exactly how it works. And what happens to the engineers and doctors and entrepreneurs in that scenario? The people who make up that engine.
They realize the wheels are square.
Exactly. They realize that no matter how hard they work, the system won't let them move forward. So what do? They take their engine to a different car.
Brain drain.
Massive brain drain. The smartest, most capable people emigrate to countries with round wheels, places like Australia or the US or Europe.
Or, if they stay, their potential is completely smothered by local bureaucracy.
Think about it from the perspective of a young, brilliant software engineer in a highly corrupt system.
Okay.
If they have to pay 5 different bribes to local officials just to get a permit to open a small tech firm.
Oh, man.
And then they have to worry that the government might arbitrarily seize their assets or manipulate the currency so their profits vanish.
They aren't going to innovate.
No, they are going to buy a plane ticket, or they're going to take their brilliant skills and go work in the informal, untaxed underground economy just to survive.
Education alone cannot save a country if the institutions actively punish enterprise.
Which brings us to the core of the investigation on page 8.
The hidden engines.
Right. If having all the natural resources in the world isn't enough, and having a 99% literacy rate isn't enough, what are the hidden metrics?
What actually determines if a nation succeeds or fails over an 80-year timeline?
The research points directly to 3 hidden engines: governance, the Gini coefficient, and gender equity.
Let's really dig into these, starting with governance on page 8. Because I think people hear governance and their eyes glaze over.
They do, but it is the invisible force field that protects everything else. The data uses a suite of indicators, things like corruption control, the strength of liberal democracy from the VDEM data, and overall government effectiveness from the World Bank.
They use a spiderweb chart for this, right?
Yes. And when you map these out, Australia creates what the researchers call a full enclosure of dominance.
Full enclosure, meaning they just win on every front.
They excel across every single metric of governance, consistently, for decades.
It's administrative efficiency. It's the boring stuff. It's the fact that when you apply for a business permit in Sydney, you get it in 30 days, the process is transparent, and you don't have to know the mayor's cousin to get it pushed through.
It is the predictability of the mundane.
Yes.
It's the assurance that a contract signed today will be honored by the courts 10 years from now. Contract that with Argentina.
Right.
The data shows a massive, precipitous drop in government effectiveness right at the start of the 21st century.
And what's crucial for the listener to understand is the causality here. The researchers explicitly annotated this. This drop in governance perfectly matches the timeline of their economic recession.
The failure of the administration preceded the failure of the economy.
Wow.
When the government loses its ability to effectively enforce rules and collect taxes fairly, the economy immediately bleeds out.
Okay, moving to page 9, hidden engine number 2, the Giannone coefficient.
The social cost of inequality.
Right. So, for those who might not spend their weekends reading economic journals, the Gini coefficient is the standard mathematical measure of inequality. It measures the wealth gap.
Simply put, yes.
A low score means wealth is spread out relatively evenly.
Yeah.
A high score means a few people have everything
Mm.
and everyone else has nothing.
Right. And here, looking at the mirrored bar chart, Australia utilized a very specific, intentional macroeconomic strategy.
They didn't just let the free market run entirely unchecked.
No, they actively used tax policies and welfare transfers, the LIS Gini-related indicators in the paper, to stabilize a massive, robust middle class. They kept their Gini coefficient relatively flat over the decades.
Wait, I can hear the pushback already. Someone might say, isn't that just socialism? Why does the wealth gap matter if the overall GDP is growing?
It's a great question, and it's strictly about economic mechanics, not ideology.
Okay, laid out.
Macroeconomically, extreme inequality is a disaster because it destroys your domestic consumer base. If all the wealth generated by a country's resources is concentrated at the very top, say, in the hands of a few landowning families or mining magnates, those few people can only buy so many refrigerators.
Right. A billionaire doesn't buy 10,000 pairs of jeans.
Exactly. But if you distribute that wealth through a stable, well-compensated middle class, you have millions of people buying jeans, taking out mortgages, buying groceries, and going out to eat.
A broad middle class is the engine of sustained domestic consumption.
It creates a self-sustaining loop of demand that incentivizes businesses to hire and grow.
While Argentina's wealth gap absolutely exploded during their economic crises, there's a massive spike in the inequality data around 2002.
The middle class, which historically was actually quite strong in Argentina compared to the rest of Latin America, was utterly hollowed out.
Millions fell below the poverty line overnight. The consumer base just evaporated.
Which perfectly sets up the third hidden engine on page 10. And honestly, the one the researchers highlight as vastly neglected in mainstream economic discussions.
Gender. Specifically, female labor force participation.
Yes.
I want to spend some real time on this because the contrast between the three countries is fascinating, and it totally reframes how we talk about policy.
Look at Australia first on the dual axis chart. Over the decades, Australia saw a steady, healthy, continuous rise in female workforce participation.
The WDI LFPF data.
Yes. This wasn't just a social victory, it was a massive economic multiplier. By integrating women fully into the formal economy, they essentially doubled their talent pool.
They just constantly added high-level productivity to their GDP.
Exactly. But the contrast between Armenia and Argentina here is where the story gets really deep. In Armenia, female workforce participation acted as this incredible, vital shock absorber for the entire nation.
It really did. When Armenia went through its agonizing post-Soviet transitions, when state-run factories collapsed and traditional male-dominated heavy industries vanished overnight.
It was the women entering the workforce, often in new service sectors or light manufacturing, that stabilized household consumption.
They kept families afloat.
And by keeping their household solvent, they kept the broader domestic economy moving during the worst of the crisis.
They were the safety net. But then you look at Argentina.
It's a very different story there.
During the hyperinflationary periods and the 2001 crisis, the data shows that women were largely forced into the informal economy just to survive.
That's the tragic difference. In Argentina, they weren't entering high productivity corporate roles or tech jobs.
No.
They were doing whatever it took in the untaxed, unregulated shadows of the economy just to put food on the table.
They were locked out of the formal systems of credit and career advancement.
Which meant their labor, while essential for survival, wasn't captured in the formal GDP and couldn't drive systemic growth.
I really want to emphasize this for you listening right now, because when we watch political debates, things like gender equality in the workplace or middle-class tax policies or anti-corruption task forces, they are so often framed as feel-good social policies.
treated as HR buzzwords or luxury items a country can focus on only after it gets rich.
Exactly. But this research proves the exact opposite. They are hardened mathematical economic shields.
They are the titanium armor that protects a country against disaster.
I couldn't agree more. These internal shields determine exactly how a country handles external global shocks.
You cannot control what the global market does. You cannot control if the price of wheat drops or if there's a global pandemic or a financial crash in another hemisphere.
But your internal institutions determine if you survive that shock or if you collapse.
Which brings us perfectly to the final phase of the analysis on pages 11 and 12. Trade, technology, and the dreaded resource curse.
The resource curse, also known in economics as Dutch disease.
It sounds like an Indiana Jones movie.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
But it is terrifyingly real for developing nations. Let's look at export structures, the pie charts on page 12.
Because both Argentina and Australia are heavily dependent on digging things out of the ground and growing things in the dirt.
They are both massive commodity exporters. So when global commodity prices drop, which they inevitably do, it's a cycle, why did it utterly crush Argentina, but only leave a minor dent in Australia?
Good question.
If they are both selling raw materials to the world, shouldn't they both suffer equally?
It comes down to how they utilize the windfall during the good times. This is the essence of the resource curse. Let's explain how the mechanism actually works because it's counterintuitive.
Please do.
When a country experiences a massive boom in natural resources, let's say iron ore in Australia, or soy and beef in Argentina, a massive flood of foreign money enters the country to buy those goods.
Sounds great so far. Lots of cash.
It sounds great, but it triggers a trap. That flood of foreign money dramatically drives up the value of your local currency.
Okay.
Suddenly, your currency is extremely strong. But because your currency is so strong, every other industry in your country, like manufacturing or technology or textiles, suddenly becomes too expensive to export.
Oh, I see.
Nobody wants to buy a car made in your country because your strong currency makes it cost twice as much as a car from somewhere else. So your manufacturing sector dies. You become entirely dependent on that one single resource.
So how did Australia dodge the trap? They had a massive mining boom fueled by demand from Asia. Why didn't their manufacturing sector collapse into irrelevance and leave them vulnerable?
Because Australia recognized the danger of the curse. They took the massive wealth generated by their natural resources and they intentionally, methodically used it to build out secondary and tertiary sectors.
They built a world-class financial sector.
They built a massive international education export sector, bringing in students from all over the world. They built high-end consulting and services sectors.
They essentially built a diversified economic buffer.
And Argentina didn't do that. Argentina, conversely, relied almost entirely on the raw agricultural exports.
They didn't sufficiently diversify their institutional portfolio or build up those high-end service buffers.
They assumed the boom would last forever. So when international commodity prices inevitably dropped, Argentina was left completely exposed to the wind.
The one pillar holding up the economy cracked, and the whole roof came down.
And we see this exact same dynamic play out again vividly in the modern era with the internet, which is detailed on page 11.
The digital divide.
Let's look at the 2010s, the great digital inflection point. The infrastructure data, the WDI internet, and mobile penetration charts.
They use a combined bar chart for this. It shows that all three countries got online at roughly the same time.
They all got smartphones, they all got 4G networks, they all got broadband, the technology was distributed.
But getting the technology isn't the same as monetizing it. Having a smartphone doesn't make you rich. It's what you do with the connection.
Exactly. Australia tied its digital transformation directly to service exports. The WDI TradeServe data.
The data shows their trade and services going through the roof. They didn't just use the internet to consume media or stream movies.
No, they used it to export financial services, software engineering, architecture, and consulting to the rest of the world. They monetized the digital leap.
Whereas a country struggling with basic institutional stability uses the internet primarily for communication or domestic consumption.
But struggles to build global digital-first companies because the underlying banking and legal infrastructure to support tech startups just isn't trusted by international venture capital.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the winding, wildly divergent lines from the starting gun in 1946 all the way through the 2010s.
It's been quite a journey.
But this academic framework also runs predictive models for 2024 and 2025. This is page 13, the prediction radar chart.
Right, based on the latest data.
Where are these three runners right now as we speak?
According to the models and the latest data, the trajectories are holding true to their institutional foundations. Argentina is still deeply struggling with the structural rebuild after years of high inflation.
The trauma of the sawtooth graph is still very much present.
They are trying to implement severe reforms, but as we discussed, rebuilding trust takes decades, not months.
And Australia?
Australia maintains its lead in the Human Development Index. They are still running that steady, boring, hydrated marathon.
They face challenges, of course.
Sure, housing costs, climate shifts, but their institutions give them the flexibility to adapt.
And Armenia, our wild card.
Armenia is actively hunting for new momentum. They are leveraging regional cooperation and pushing hard into digital industries.
Proving that the latecomer resilience is still very much alive if they can maintain political stability in a tough neighborhood.
And this brings us to page 14, the ultimate grand thesis of the entire 15-page source document.
The matrix analysis chart.
Yes. The researchers boil all of this down into a concept they call institutional determinism.
Institutional determinism is a powerful phrase.
It really is.
Let's define it.
The conclusion is that natural resources are ultimately a double-edged sword. If you have infinite gold, oceans of oil, and endless fields of wheat, but you do not have an independent judiciary to enforce business contracts,
Right.
and you do not have transparent elections to peacefully transfer power, and you do not have a bureaucracy that is resistant to bribery,
Those resources are not a blessing. They are a curse.
they will just fuel corruption, create extreme inequality, and lead to political volatility as factions fight to control the resource wealth.
It is so profound. It completely flips the script. This raises a massive question regarding how nations and the citizens within them prioritize their political energy.
It does. It shows that fixing governance is the highest possible priority.
Ensuring that a judge cannot be bribed by a corporation.
Ensuring that a small business permit takes 30 days instead of 3 years of red tape.
Ensuring that the central bank is genuinely independent and isn't just a printing press for the president's re-election campaign.
Fixing those boring administrative things is infinitely more valuable to the future wealth of a nation than discovering another 1,000,000 tons of copper in the ground.
It's the ultimate takeaway of the entire deep dive on page 15. Prosperity is not an accident of geography.
No, it's not.
It isn't about being lucky enough to be born on an island or on top of an oil well or next to a gold mine. Prosperity is the boring, tedious, daily commitment to long-term rules and contracts.
It is the steady, unglamorous maintenance of the civic machine.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider, bringing this all the way home. We are so socially conditioned to judge a country's power and its potential by its shiny exterior.
We look at its skyline, the size of its military, or the vastness of its natural resources.
But the real predictor of your country's future over the next 50 years isn't in the ground. It isn't in the glass skyscrapers.
It's in how boring, how predictable, and how transparent its institutions are.
Yeah, it's the invisible stuff.
So as you go about your week, look at your own local government. Look at your own civic institutions.
Your local courts, your city council, your zoning boards, your school districts.
Are they operating with transparency? Are they building a sturdy, boring, predictable staircase for the next generation to climb?
Or, through corruption and short-term thinking, are they setting up a bungee jump?
That is a brilliant and slightly intimidating question to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this conversation encourages you to look past the surface of the daily news cycle, to look past the loud political noise, and start thinking critically about the invisible institutional frameworks that are quietly running your world. We'll catch you on the next one.